What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Ryan of Throw the Fight. Thank you for being here, man. It is great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, man. Anytime. It's so awesome to have you here. Your new album, Strangeworld, is absolutely kick ass. And for people who haven't heard the full album yet, do you feel like the first singles that we heard so far, such as Cover Your Tracks and Hourglass and Obey, is a good representation of this whole album? Or is that just scratching the surface of what is to come?
Yeah, it's a good representation. We got a couple more bangers coming out. We have a new single that drops next Thursday on the 8th. That's more of like a little more slower ballady track, but the rest of them are pretty much bangers through and through.
Yeah. Was this just intended to be a continuation of Settle Your Sins in a way, or was this meant to be sort of like a new beginning in a way for Throw the Fight?
It's a little bit. I guess we don't really think about that too much. I mean, it is kind of a continuation just because the last album came out at the height of COVID and we weren't able to do any touring or play any shows or anything like that. So that record was kind of like the It Is What It Is album. And so we knew that we wanted to kind of get back into the studio a lot sooner and put out another record. So that's kind of what we did. But we just kept it short. We didn't really want to do a ton of songs because our audience mostly like listens to the singles anyways. So we just wanted to strictly focus on a shorter record, and that's why it's just 9 songs in and out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's simple and it's to the point. I think it manages to stay intriguing when you start off with Cover Your Tracks and you end with Lost in the Lies or the Wake Up sort of remix aspect behind it in a way. Was there at all like a preconceived vision behind this album, or was this like a very improvisational and very experimental process?
We don't really put too much thought into that. The idea going into every album is always to just write really strong songs, write I mean, we're all about like big hooks and big choruses and heavy riffs and just fun stuff like that. Like we don't really try and overthink it too much. It's really just about writing strong hard rock songs at the end of the day. And we spend quite a bit of time just like doing a lot of pre-production and polishing things before we even go into a studio to track anyways for the record. So when we did these last songs, they were pretty much good to go for the most part. All of the guitars and everything like that, we tracked here in Minneapolis before we went out to California to do, production with Josh and Joseph. But the time out there was mostly just tracking vocals, for the most part, and doing some small edits after the fact. We used a lot of our like pre-production tracks and everything in the final record.
Has Throw the Fight ever approached anything from like a conceptual standpoint in a way where like maybe a concept was sort of like dictating the direction of the music? Because I feel like albums such as In Pursuit of Tomorrow or What Doesn't Kill Us does have a very like sort of a thought provoking aspect behind it.
That's cool. I mean, it's always interesting to me to hear people's interpretations of this stuff after the fact and what they put into it, based on their own experiences and things like that. I mean, for me personally, like, no, we're not that deep. Like we don't really think about that stuff too much on the front end. I think a lot of the times, like, when you're piecing the tracks together and you're working on the album art and the visuals are starting to come together in conjunction with the record titles and everything like that, it does start to take on kind of like a life of its own, and you can derive a lot more meaning from that. But like going into it, it's either a banger or it's not. The songs are either good or they're not. And so that's really all we think about. We don't really overthink that stuff too much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think because like in the end, like if the song isn't good in a way, who's gonna care what the concept or the meaning is behind it anyway, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I guess a good song is always going to be subjective to different people. But I mean, in terms of like the production quality and there are certain elements, that need to be there. I mean, just having that stuff dialed in is crucial. You got to get that right first.
Yeah.
All the other stuff you do after the fact isn't really going to do, help you too much if the stuff doesn't slam in the first place.
Definitely. And also being that you are one of the only original member in Throw the Fight. left, has working with different musicians and different people coming and going from Throw the Fight maybe allowed you to further like experiment with your sound and bring in new step into new uncharted territory?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think the biggest thing with us right now is, this year is our 20-year anniversary. So we've been doing this for quite a while, and now I would say within like the last, 5 or 6 years, we've really just dialed in our process in terms of songwriting and being able to put out a lot more material more frequently. A third of our catalog has been released just within the last 3 or 4 years, so that kind of speaks to like the speed at which we're recording and releasing music these days. So if anything, I think we've just kind of like dialed in the writing and recording process, within the last few years, just so we can kind of like put out more material and kind of cater to that. Because the most frustrating thing for me is like you spend all this time like writing and recording a record, and then you put it out, and then everyone is like, okay, great, when's the next one come out? And you're like, son of a bitch, we just spent the last year working on this, but people want like the next thing and the next thing. So there's a fine line between trying to walk all that stuff.
Yeah, and also, it's funny when I interviewed I Hate God a couple years back in 2019. Mike Nine said that like everybody begs them to do a new record, and then they do it, and then people just want to hear like the old school classics or the deep cuts from those times period. Like for a lot of people, nobody really cares about the new stuff when you put it out, right?
Yeah, totally, totally. And again, a lot of it has to do with just, the way music is released these days with streaming and everything like that. Like the singles are what get pushed and what your audience gets heard. So, for a band like us in our position, it just doesn't make sense to record a ton of tracks when you know that, the majority of your audience potentially won't even be hearing a lot of it, if it's not released as an actual standalone single. So
Yeah.
there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, and you led me perfectly into it. You kind of beat me to it in the question, but 20 years of Throw the Fight, congratulations. So I wanted to kind of discuss a couple of anniversaries. First up being the debut EP that we heard, because you released two EPs before we got the first full length of In Pursuit of Tomorrow. So was the first two EPs, self-titled and The Fire Within, kind of still in a way like finding yourselves, or sort of like throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks in a way? Or did you
Totally.
feel like you kind of found yourself in the debut EP?
Yeah, no, I mean the stuff that we put out originally is a huge departure from where we're at right now. I mean, we've had, just we've had four different vocalists just within the last 20 years, so I mean, just that alone is going to change the sound of the band. But our first one that we did, I mean, we recorded it ourselves. This was in like 2003. We had no idea what we were doing, and we just pressed a bunch of them and gave them out for free to our friends. It never was like released commercially, thank God, because it sounded terrible. But our first EP, The Fire Within, that came out in 2006, and that was like our first like actual release where we partnered with an indie label and put that out ourselves and toured on it for a while. So for a couple of years before our album came out in 2008. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of that stuff back in the day was very metalcore sounding, and I don't know. I mean, we've maybe mellowed out a little bit, in our old age, maybe to a point, but yeah, the old stuff is a lot more metalcore, and the new stuff is a little less of that, depending on the track you're listening to.
Yeah, but it also marked 10 years since you released the Vault EP of those B-sides. So, like, with the releasing tracks such as Breaking the Cycle or My Life in Your Hands or Years Past or I Know, like, was that maybe kind of like the stuff you were putting aside because you felt the same way about the EP in a way? Like, why did you guys decide to finally release that in 2013?
I think at that point, our what was it? Our sophomore album had came out a year prior, and we had just had a bunch of extra songs from that session that we were sitting on. So we just went and just tracked them locally, with a buddy here in Minneapolis, and released those, just because at the time we just had a bunch of material. Now we're kind of at the point where like, if we do have a bunch of material, we're just releasing them as digital singles like very frequently now with very short lead times at this point.
When it
Back
comes
then there was a lot more lead time between like putting out music, and we don't really do that anymore. We try not to anyways.
having different vocalists come in to throw the fight, has your guitar playing had to adjust in a way too? Because a lot of people have their guitar either tuned or even have their techniques accommodated to the singer. Have you maybe changed your style or changed your techniques with different vocalists coming in?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it really changes depending on the vocalist. It does change on the song. So we definitely, I think of it like as a song by song case. I'm not very much of like a shredder by any means. I'm more of like a melodic guitar player where I'm always trying to write riffs and lead lines that will fit in with the melody to kind of like take the vocals to the next level and kind of complement them more in that way. So that's typically how I think of my guitar playing.
When it comes to writing guitar parts, do you almost kind of need to be in a specific place in order to get that inspiration, or does inspiration just strike out of the blue?
Sometimes it strikes out of the blue, that's for me personally, that's few and far between though. If I was like always waiting for inspiration to strike before I'm like writing material and coming up with ideas, it would never happen. For me, I typically work best under obligation, so like when we've got some ideas that are down and we have studio time booked and I know I've got to have stuff figured out by the time I go in there, that's when I like putting the pressure on myself to do it in that moment. Because otherwise, it's just it's hard to do that, frequently. So I just prefer to have like deadlines and somewhat of the material laid out a little bit. That doesn't happen all the time though, but that's usually the case.
Yeah, I mean, my tattoo artist once said that if she only tattooed when she was inspired, she wouldn't pay her rent. So,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, yeah. Do you have any theoretical background that you apply into your music in a way, or completely on the self-taught side?
It's all on the self-taught. We just do it by ear at this point. I mean, I started playing guitar when I was about 11, so I was a little kid, and I took lessons for those first 5 or 6 years, and then after that it was just self-taught. I can't read music or any or anything like that. None of us can. So
Yeah, I mean, it's rock and roll. It's all about breaking the rules of theory to begin
yeah,
with, right?
yeah.
Yep. Um,
Lucky for us, you don't have to know how to read music.
of course, of course. But then you like, man, you talk to like some of those tech death musicians, and they know theory more than Mozart did. So
Yeah, those guys are on a next level. They're on another level than we are. That's for sure.
when it came to because the evolution in Throw the Fight's sound is very like it's very apparent. Like you could really look at it and know like, okay, that's a drastic difference from the first EP to now, having that sort of starting off with that sort of metalcore style, and then moving on to Settle Your Sins and Strange World. Was that like an intentional evolution in a way, or did it just kind of turn out that way over the years?
It just turned out that way. Yeah, it really just turned out that way. A lot of it has to do with, the production team behind the record too. I mean, if you compare like, In Pursuit of Tomorrow to What Doesn't Kill Us to Settle Your Sins and Transmissions, all of those were done with different producers and different production teams, so they'll all sound different, just based off of that alone. But yeah, I mean, it was just more of like just a natural transition, with Settle Your Sins and Strange World. I mean, those are the last two, or those have Cade doing vocals on them, so that's kind of like the most recent thing. Like Cade's been our singer since 2019, so the last few years or so, but he's obviously been in the band for quite a bit longer than that. But yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing is just he's doing vocals, with everything. So
yeah. When it comes to making music as a band, and people like tell me, oh, we all collectively came together and it was so mutual. I don't really believe it, because you're in a band with, 4 or 5 other people, 3 people, you're all going to have your different experiences that you bring into the music. So is it better if really everybody is on the same page when writing the music together, or could all of you being in your own different worlds actually help maybe enhance the songwriting process?
we typically do it in our own different worlds right now to start this stuff and start the process. Chris does a lot of, Chris, our other guitar player, does a lot of like structural writing and things like that. So he'll write a lot of riffs, and he'll be like, okay, here's an intro and a verse and a chorus idea, and it's just like a rhythm part and he'll do like a very basic drum beat behind it, and then we'll just text it to everybody, and then when we go into the studio, then we'll just refine it from that point. But typically everyone's kind of just like starting in their own world and bouncing ideas. We have like written a lot of material over the years where we're in the room together, and someone will have a riff idea or something like that, and we'll just build the song around it with all of us in the room like that. That has happened in the past. But most recently, like, we're all kind of doing our own thing and just kind of sending tracks around, and really terrible sounding demos to each other, and then we're just polishing it when we go into the studio as time allows.
Yeah. And when it comes to playing live together, is there a completely different energy into playing live as to songwriting, or is there anything that maybe bridges the two arts together?
Yeah, I mean, playing live, it's all about the show, and it's all about the crowd interaction and having fun and all of that stuff. So it's all about the party. Yeah, I mean, with us, like Jeff, our drummer, he moved to Florida, a year or so ago. So he's down in Florida. So like we have to be super intentional with our shows and our touring schedule and how we play and when we play and things like that. So I mean, when it comes to writing and rehearsals and stuff like that, like we're pretty much just rehearsing on our own at our houses. And then, we'll do a handful of rehearsals together, prior to a couple shows, and that's pretty much it, or a tour.
Does it get harder to put a set list together with every album that you do put out?
It does, us personally, we always want to play like the newest stuff because that's what we're always the most excited about. So there is a balance of like trying to have enough material where like we're still invested in the set list, but still having some of the old stuff that some people like. I would say right now we're probably doing like 50%, new material, and well, maybe 50 or 60% new material, and throwing in a couple older songs. But for the most part, we try and keep the set list to like stuff that's been out within the last like 5 or 6 years for the most part.
So no deep cuts off the first CP to celebrate 20 years?
No, definitely not.
Why not?
Definitely not. Honestly, a lot of it has to do with just the way the band is set up right now. So we don't have a bass player. Cade was our bass player,
Yeah.
and we moved him to a vocalist. So we don't even play live or tour with a bass player. It's just, the four of us and two guitar players and a drum kit and vocals. So we play live to a bass track. So instead of just having a bass player in the band, it's way more convenient for us at this point, and it makes way more sense for us to just run a bass track. So even if we did want to do a lot of that old stuff, we would have to go and like record a bass track for it and all of that and everything. And we just rather focus on the new stuff.
Do it now
The
that
juice isn't worth the squeeze,
do it now that Kate is just holding the microphone. He could pull off the metalcore style frontman too.
I know.
Yeah. It would be one thing if he was singing and playing bass and he has to be more focused and do, but now that he just has the mic, he could go all out.
Yeah. I mean, no offense to bass players, they're obviously great, but yeah, I mean, like we did the pros and cons analysis, and where we're like, do we need to have a new person come in and play bass? And we're just like, no, it's just another schedule to work around, and it doesn't really make sense, especially since we don't really tour a ton, at this point in our careers anyways. It's just another schedule and another person to pay. You might as well just run a bass track for live shows. And the funny thing is I've never had, like, we've been playing without a bass player for the last 4 years at this point. We've never had one single person ask, hey, where's the bass player? Not one single person. No one even really notices. The only people who ever notice or say something are like the house sound engineers when we roll into a club.
Yeah. Well, hey, I mean, there's been so many strange bands out there. Some bands, like one of my friends' bands who's really freaking good, Nefariant, they don't have a guitar player at all. It's vocalist, drums, keyboards, and bass. So,
Yeah.
like, you could get away with anything nowadays. So,
Totally. Yeah.
and I have two more questions for you. One of them is another anniversary album, and that is last year, because last year was 10 years of What Doesn't Kill Us. And being that was the sophomore album, was you trying to take a very big evolutionary jump from In Pursuit of Tomorrow to then, in a way, or was it sort of like kind of picking up where you left off after that, and did that at all help lay down the groundwork for what we would hear in Transmission, Settle Your Sins, and Now?
Yeah, it was more picking up to where we left off. I think it's just each album is kind of like a reflection of like where you're at in that point in your life. So, I mean, the lyrics and all of that would have definitely been, reference between what was going on, in terms of that point in our lives. But no, I mean, it's more or less just like a natural transition. We did a lot of with What Doesn't Kill Us. We did a lot of writing out there when we were working on the record. So a couple of those songs, were, I think two or three of them were written when we were out there with John Feldman doing that record. But otherwise, it's just a progression. One thing is a progression to the next.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is being that Throw the Fight originated in Minneapolis with fantastic scene out there and a great history of hardcore and punk and metal and all that. What was the sort of scene like starting in the early days for Throw the Fight? I mean, with the EP coming out in 2003, this was during a time where, metalcore was at its prime. Emo was really also on top of the world at the time. So how was the sort of scene and getting your foot in the door in the Minneapolis scene back in the day?
It was good. Originally, we started out in Wisconsin, so our rehearsal space was in like the Menominee, Ellsworth area. So we would just do a ton, like those really, really early years. We would do a lot of shows, like just bar shows out in Wisconsin in that area. And we didn't start playing clubs in Minneapolis until, we had already been playing for maybe a couple years. Back then it was like the Quest was like the place to be. So we would do a lot of shows at the Quest and a lot of shows at like the Ascot Room, which is like a small venue at the Quest. But then later on, we kind of cut our teeth at this venue in Maplewood called The Rock. And it was like a 500 capacity club. And we played just many, many shows there. So many shows over the years with tons of great bands. So I would probably like think of like The Rock and the Triple Rock and the Fine Line. Like those were the places that we kind of like came up through here locally.
I mean, it's funny that you originated in Wisconsin, the home of Misery Signals, as well as great death metal bands such as Jungle Rot. Who else? November's Doom. So like it's a very like diverse scene in a way. Was Milwaukee Metal Fest sort of past, kind of like a two before you guys in a way? Did you at all cut your teeth in there?
No, we never played Milwaukee Metal Fest. Honestly, I wasn't really familiar with it until like the last year or two ago. So we completely missed the boat on that. I feel like Milwaukee Metal Fest is more metal. Like it's a little more extreme. I don't know that would even be a fit for us, but I would love to play it at some point if we got an offer.
They brought out Shadows Fall and some After the Burial and some metalcore bands, so you could do it. You're just gonna have to play that debut EP again.
Yeah, we'll just have to play the bangers. Just only do the rippers.
You have the ability to adjust your set list. I mean, the fact that you were able to tour with or like share the stage with Bullet for My Valentine and Black Veil Brides, but then also play with bands like Avenged Sevenfold or Stained or Chevelle. I think you could kind of adjust the set list in a perfect realm.
Yeah, totally. We absolutely do that too.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. For such an awesome chat. Just with the release of Strangeworld, anything else you'd like to promote for Throw the Fight, if you're allowed to say at this time?
For sure. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. And yeah, everyone can check out the band at throwthefight.com and they can pre-order the record right now. Those will go until the 30th, and then the new record drops on June 30th.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Throw the Fight. Be sure to check out Strangeworld coming out June 30th. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much.